Sabah al-Khair, good morning, dear listeners. You're listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Robert Martin, Nasser Mashni, and Yusuf Ahmed al-Rimawi.
Palestine Remembered is Australia's only English-language radio program that is totally dedicated to Palestine. We'd like to welcome those listening on 855 and those that will join us on podcast at 3cr.org.au.
Thanks for joining us. Stay with us and enjoy the episode.
Bringing you the news and views and the untold side of the Palestinian struggle for freedom from a Palestinian perspective. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We've got a fantastic guest for you from Palestine today, Joharah, who is a writer and translator and a dear friend of mine. I met her some time ago and reconnected recently. Good morning, Joharah. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure, Joharah. Thanks so much for joining us. Joharah, one of the things that our audience always wants to know is the situation on the ground from whenever we speak to somebody in Palestine. The reality is recently we had an election and everybody around the West is sort of saying, well, good news, Netanyahu's gone, so maybe there's an opportunity for talks to start again, an opportunity to revive the two-state solution and a whole conversation about what opportunities exist. The reality is we know better that Naftali Bennett is to the right of Benjamin Netanyahu and leads a coalition of sycophants and settlers and really terrible people. Can you tell our audience exactly what's going on there and why we should be loath to believe that?
Actually, I find it, I don't want to say funny because it's not funny, but I find it really surprising when people think that, Netanyahu's out of the way. Yes, he's out of the way, but we have, like you said, an even more rightist government. Not we, but the Israelis. And to be honest, whether the Israeli government is right or left, or even when Labor was in power, facts on the ground are more or less the same. Because, in my opinion, I think it's all tied into, what Israel is based on, which is the usurpation of the land. And it's really, it's more of an existential conflict than anything else. And so it's basically, they want us out. They want the land with the least amount of Palestinians. And so when we have this government, the only thing that with this government is that the mask has been completely removed. You have Bennett, you have Lapid, you have people who are telling you, no, we don't really believe in the two-state solution. We're going to build more settlements. We're going to, if we want to shoot a Palestinian, we're going to shoot a Palestinian. So there is no real hope in reviving what the so-called peace process. That's a whole other issue. I mean, I think the two-state solution has been dead for a long time, and it's just time to call the time of death and realize that we have to change course. But even with that very lacking solution that has been on the table for 20 plus years, this government is not even going to pay it lip service. So I think now the ball is in the Palestinians' court that they need to change course in their narrative and in their policies and in their strategy.
Mansour Abbas, he is a Palestinian. Can you explain to me what compelled him to join this coalition?
I don't know. I think that he, the only thing that I can say is that everything has shifted over the past 10, 20 years, that someone like Mansour Abbas now has a platform for a legitimate platform to have these kind of ideas and this kind of policy. For me, it's very strange. I don't understand how someone can say that he is, he's a supporter of, they say Arab, but I like to call them Palestinian rights inside of what is called Israel, and then also, hold hands with this kind of government. I don't understand. I don't support. And I think that there's a real problem also within the Palestinian community inside of Israel, that it has allowed for this kind of ideology to take hold and be what is illegitimate. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, this never would have happened. But again, I mean, it's reflective of also the Palestinians in the West Bank, the leadership here. So it may be just like an ongoing trend where what is acceptable has moved. We didn't used to accept, Palestinians would never have accepted this 30 years ago. And that's dangerous for me. To me, that's very dangerous.
I mean, because the reality is he's extolled. I met with a member of parliament in Australia, and he goes, well, Israel's fantastic. Mansour Abbas is a member of the new party, new government. And so it's fantastic to be an Arab in Israel because you get representation. Sheikh Jarrah, we had the court ruling and an offer, just pay a nominal amount of rent and you can stay, without even understanding the concept that we're not paying rent for our own homes. Go get stuffed. But the word we heard was that Bennett had reached out to Biden and his team to say, put pressure on the Palestinians to make these guys accept this offer. We need this public relations nightmare to go away. How could Mansour Abbas reconcile himself? Is that a friction point at all, or he can get over that?
You know what? I don't think that it's going to be a friction point, because for him, he already appeases the whole political trend, all of these policies within Israel. Of course, he wraps it in a wrapper of, I'm trying to protect citizens and what have you. But I'm not an expert on Mansour Abbas, to be fair. But I think that, again, he's using this. It's not going to be a point of friction because he's already put it out there that he is going to work within the system. Okay, and for him, he can always justify that this is a way for the residents to stay in their homes. Of course, the people of Sheikh Jarrah have already rejected it. They said no way, because that means that they would have to recognize that the land and that the property is owned by the settlers, and this is something they would never do. So it's still in court and they're appealing it or whatever. But Mansour Abbas is someone who wants to be part of a system that is already very discriminatory against the Palestinians inside of Israel and the Palestinians in general. And for me, this is way more dangerous than for us to say, no or whatever, and for the Israelis just to do things straight out. This way, he's giving them legitimacy. Okay, and he will, and that's what's scarier. And this is what you were saying, that you spoke to someone from Parliament in Australia who was saying, look, he's part of the Parliament. That for me is very dangerous because it gives a face to Israel that's not true.
He's just super Stockholmed, it seems.
Yeah, it's true. That's true. It's very strange for me. I mean, I don't know where he came out of he just came out of the woodwork. And again, like I said, this is something that never would have happened. And that's what, again, and that's what worries me, that it's becoming more and more normalized for someone like Mansour Abbas to be part of the system and to speak out very publicly, to be accepted, not by the majority, okay, but by enough people that he's not in any danger.
Every liberation movement has its Uncle Toms, though, Joharah, and
absolutely,
this guy is front and center.
Absolutely.
Whilst we're still on the elections, Bibi's investigation hasn't gone away. What are the chances of Benjamin coming back? Bennett's got a one-seat majority. That Knesset system, how it's set up, is just default crashing.
That's true. I think that Netanyahu's days are over, I think, politically. But, I mean, you never know. But, the United States is obviously trying to keep the Bennett government intact, in place. And, this whole thing about the consulate in East Jerusalem. They're not pushing it until the budget gets passed and et cetera, so that his government is not in danger. I don't think that Netanyahu will make a comeback. I really don't. I think once it's over, it was over. But for me, again, like I said in the beginning, as long as you have a government, any Israeli government is going to be based on Zionist ideology. And whether it's to the left, to the right, you may get, a little bit of appeasement from here or there. But we have seen over the years what on the ground, it doesn't make so much of a difference. Under labor, we saw under the Oslo Accords, we saw what happened with the settlement. We saw how they multiplied. So, sometimes maybe it's even better that you have a right-wing government and the mask is removed and things are what they are. I don't know if that's too extremist, but that's kind of how I see it.
Oh, no, you're very right. I can tell you the conversations I had around advocacy between Trump and Netanyahu in those final 2 years. I don't think we recruited, we couldn't have recruited more people. Netanyahu's fantastic for us, because he's evil in intent and evil personified, but also is unashamedly evil in expression. And so Zionism is exposed.
Exactly. And so are these buffoons who are in power now.
Yep.
They're not scared to say that they hate us, or that, the two-state solution. Of course, we're not going to give them a Palestinian state. Well, you know what? They've all said that. They have all meant it, and they've all believed it, but they, some of them just didn't have the courage to say it. I don't know. So at least these guys are honest.
Naphtali's in the honeymoon period, though, Joharah. So, Naphtali, I've killed enough Arabs. I've killed plenty of Arabs, and there's nothing wrong with that. 15 years later, Benjamin doesn't even have the filter anymore. He just goes, of course we've got to mow the lawn,
Exactly. So, but that also, so that one reflects on them of what their true intent is. But it reflects on how the world views them. That no matter what they say, it's acceptable. And, so this is why I'm saying is that for the Palestinians, right now, we see what we're up against. There's no longer any guys. There's no longer any, the Labor Party may be a little bit nicer, what have you. No, we see what we are up against, which means that we need to reassess how we approach this conflict. And I think that's a huge feat that we haven't tackled correctly.
Now, at the moment, we are led, inverted commas, I used led very, very loosely. We are administered, patrolled by the sycophantic Palestinian Authority, an authority that doesn't have the authority to metaphorically wipe its own bottom.
Exactly.
I mean, look, it's easy for me on the outside, Joharah, and please forgive me for anything I might say that you might find as a trespass. But the brutality, the grotesque way that the PA acted with Nizar Banat, to go to work in coordination with our occupiers to capture him in Area C, which meant there was coordination.
Yes, absolutely.
Within a couple of hours to have beaten a man to death, a father, a husband, a carpenter, just with a Facebook account. This man is, pure of intent, that we go from that to the protests we saw in the street and the same police mechanisms that we see in Ferguson or in the United States or the Zionists and the IOF when they're treating us, our own police doing the same thing to us. It's easy for me on the outside, again, Joharah, please, but at what point do our people rise up and have the intifada against the PA?
Oh, this is the question that I've been asking myself for a very long time. And I think that you're right. This is something that we need to tackle head on and immediately. The murder of Nizar Banat was not just a wake-up call. It was a huge slap in our face as people. I think that we have tried, and I was in the street with the people, and almost every protest against the PA and the brutality that they administered in killing this man. And I've always said it, and now I say it even more emphatically, is that instead of just having one layer of oppression, we now have two. We need to, the PA in its current form needs to be removed, because not only is it not working hand in hand with the people towards liberation, it is working counter to it. It is working counter to our struggle. The fact that the security coordination with Israel, the fact that, like you said, they were able to, 20 some security men were able to enter Area A of Hebron, none the least, of Hebron, to arrest this man. I mean, I'm telling you, an ants cannot enter without a coordination with the Israelis. Okay, they will not be allowed. He was actually He was actually, I'm sorry, it wasn't Area A. Area A is under Palestinian. He was in Area C.
C.
Okay. He was in C. He wasn't even in his home at the time. He had gone to, I think it was a cousin's house or what have you. So he was in Area C. The only way that Palestinian police and security forces can enter Area C is by coordination with the Israelis. So everyone knows it's like this bad, nasty, dark secret that everyone knows nobody talks about. And Nizar Banat's murder was something very visible and very, very brutal. But let's be honest, this coordination has been happening for years. But this one was very stark. It was, it was right out there. It was very plain sight. But we've had people who have, the Israelis come into Ramallah or Nablus, to the city centers where they're not supposed to be, but they can only enter with coordination with the Palestinians, and they arrest or they kill Palestinians. So this has been going on for years. And I keep saying this, is that we now have a responsibility. It's not just saying, oh, the Israelis. No, we now have a responsibility to change our, like you said, quote unquote, leadership, because they're working, because what they're doing is counter to what our aspirations are. And Nizar Banat's death, it cannot be in vain, because not just because of the human he is, because of what he represented.
Indeed. One of the things somebody once said to me, the difference between the Israelis coming into Ramallah or Nablus or Jenin to grab a Palestinian is they tell the PA they're coming. The PA had to ask to go into into Hebron. And I mean, our listeners know we've spoken about Hebron many times before, just how militarized that is, over 2,000 army personnel looking after somewhere between 200 and 300 extreme, fanatical, fascist Zionist settlers. So it's not an easy ask to go grab a guy, not just out of his own home, but out of his cousin's home, to know where he was. So do you have any hope? I mean, we always live with hope, Joharah, but are you seeing anything that might resemble the spring?
Oh, I want to say yes, because I've seen the people in the streets. I've seen how angry people are. I've seen people who have been on the fence for years about the PA and their role, who are now saying, no, this can't happen. So I've seen that, but I've also seen how they've cracked down on people. Okay, and not just physically crack down on them. And I mean, Ramallah, they literally drag people by their hair and beat them. But I've seen how people have been dismissed from their jobs. Of course, you can't prove it, but everyone knows. I've seen how people have been arrested for Facebook posts. So the level of brutality that the PA operates, according to which it operates, is just it's unbelievable. So I want to say yes, but I don't know how much more strength the people have to push against this. There's still a movement on the ground calling for accountability. I don't know about like the actual removal of the PA, but at this point, we want the people who were involved, and not just the thugs who actually killed him, but of course the higher ups who gave the orders, that they need to be held accountable. And this whole system needs to be changed. It needs to be swept away, in my opinion. But if not swept away, at least there has to be some kind of accountability, because so far there's been none. There's been a farce of an investigation that the government actually put together. So, the government are the ones who issued the orders. So it's basically bull. We have, the Independent Commission for Human Rights has called for an investigation. It's almost like those that everyone knows what happened. I mean, the people, the guys who actually killed him, they're on camera. So we know who they are, and we know who gave the orders, but who's going to hold them accountable? And I'm hoping that this movement doesn't die down. I'm not 100% optimistic that it won't, because not that the people don't want it. The people want a change, but how much can people handle also? I mean, it's getting really tough for the actual people, for Palestinians. We have so many levels at this point that you have to fight against. My short answer is yes, inshallah, but I'm not sure.
How much can any one people endure? While we're talking about that, Gaza, have you heard anything out of Gaza?
Gaza's a whole other ballgame. Gaza, they're basically strangling them. There's reconstruction has not begun. You have the Israelis saying that we will not allow any money in unless it's through the PA, which is a corrupt system. I mean, but they don't want to deal with Hamas. You have the Qataris who usually have this grant money that it's monthly grant money, which is not so much, but people depend on it. Now they're saying, no, it can't just come in direct. It has to go through PA banks. So nothing is actually happening. The border, the crossings in Gaza, there's only one commercial crossing in Gaza, the Kerem Abu Salim crossing, and the Israelis open it intermittently. They don't allow everything in. They have something called like dual purpose materials that they don't allow in because they say, like steel and plastic and stuff like that, that they say, we can't allow in because Hamas will use it to manufacture rockets. So the people, electricity is very intermittent in Gaza. So they actually have immediate problems. They have living problems. Their houses have not been reconstructed. Gaza is a whole other ball. And I don't understand how the world justifies this blockade that has been, clamped down. I don't understand how they don't allow in construction materials, how Israel is never held accountable for any of it. But that's the reality that we see every day, and we've seen it for years. And so that, again, I think that the international community has a huge responsibility, but I also think that the Palestinians need to be better at conveying that message.
We've been orientalized to such a degree. Our deaths are collateral damage, and, just a couple of brown people doesn't really matter, but
yeah.
If only we were fair-skinned and blue-eyed, Joharah, they'd have sent helicopters in the Sixth Fleet to come and save us.
Unfortunately, that's true. You kind of know how bad the situation is that when there was 11 days of bombardment of Gaza, where almost 300 people were killed, 200, and I don't know what it was, 60 some. I mean, whole families were basically
obliterated. Yep.
Yeah. And there was still justification that some, especially in the West, that they swallowed whole. How can anyone look at a bomb falling on a residential area that wipes out an entire family, including children, and say, well, God, Hamas, they hide. And so when you get to a point like that, you know that it's this kind of back and forth of, oh, we're under occupation. It's not going to work anymore. They don't listen. For me, it's very difficult. And that's why I'm so frustrated with the PA. Is that, this kind of talk, it's empty. To say stuff like the two-state solution, it means nothing anymore. There is no two-state solution. If you look on the ground in Palestine at this point, international jargon is the West Bank, Gaza, and in the best of cases, East Jerusalem, okay, which I have an issue with, but whatever. Even there, 60% of the West Bank is Area C. In Area C, Palestinians are not allowed to build on it. They're not allowed to have, crops, agriculture, and when they do, they get demolished. So what two-state solution are they? What state? So again, things have to change, even the way that we speak.
Indeed. Sheikh Jarrah, I did an interview on TV, and they were talking about Sheikh Jarrah, and I said, what that represents to diaspora refugee Palestinians like myself is 4K live digital imagery of 1948. The stories our parents and grandparents told us, we got to see. The expulsion from our own homes, the brutality. The Palestinians there are remaining steadfast. The courts at some point are going to rule and let the police come and get them. What happens then?
This is what I would love for people to realize, is that Sheikh Jarrah, like you said, it was basically a digital imagery of 1948. Sheikh Jarrah has a microcosm of the bigger picture. What is happening in Sheikh Jarrah is happening in Silwan, and it will happen in other places until Israel's objectives are met. Okay, it's not. Now it's about Sheikh Jarrah, but if you look over all of these years, they've been doing this. The policy of displacement and of expulsion has been ongoing. Okay, so it's a Nakba. When people say Nakba, and Nakba hasn't ended because they're uprooting people. And so Sheikh Jarrah, what's going to happen? Like you said, no one can actually bank on Israel's judicial system because it's basically a tool in the hands of the entire, the government. That that it's not going to rule in your interest. They may, in order to cover up, they may give one or two, we're not going to demolish this home, we're not going to kick people out right now. but eventually they will, because Israel has an ultimate goal, and it's not about keeping Palestinians in their home. I think what's going to happen is that in Sheikh Jarrah, in Silwan, in the old city of Jerusalem, in Naqab, in the Negev desert, where the Bedouin communities, it's all the same policy. And it gets implemented over the years, little by little, until their goal of displacing Palestinians, having the land without the people, is what's going to happen. And it's a very, very difficult struggle. And you know this, I don't have to tell you that, is that you have to really fight tooth and nail in order just to remain in your own home. And it's not necessarily, it doesn't actually have to be that they're going to come and physically take it from the house. I can talk to you about my own experience, is that I have been married to a Palestinian from Jerusalem for 23 years, and I still do not have a Jerusalem ID card. So I don't have any, they basically have not acknowledged that I have a right to live in my own home. They sometimes give me a permit to allow me to remain, but I have no actual rights in Jerusalem. So again, it's this policy where let's push people out. And if my family did not remain, they did not have what they call their center of life in Jerusalem, they could lose their Jerusalem ID card too. So it's all part and parcel of one big policy and one big goal of the land of Israel without the indigenous Palestinians. And that's why it's such a difficult, intractable, to me, conflict, because it's all about our existence. It's not about economy. It's not, it's about land and the people on it. And that's why, from the Palestinians, their strongest and most powerful weapon is actually to physically remain in their homes, on their land, until they're physically removed. That's the best way to do it. It's not easy, as you can see. It's tough, but you got to do what you got to do.
We've spoken to many Palestinians along the journey, Joharah, and they've all said, we know what happened in 48. People fled thinking they'd come home, but they're not going anywhere. We're dying in our houses this time.
Yeah, it's true. But at least we've learned our lesson. We don't leave anymore, no matter what anybody says.
No matter what. I mean, you're an inspiration. Our people are really awe-inspiring. Joharah, we've got a couple of minutes left. One of my favorite things is when Zionists tell me that BDS doesn't work and it's, the economy is growing and Israel is still the startup nation, etc. Ben and Jerry, they don't want to sell ice cream in the West Bank anymore, and apparently it's an apocalypse.
Yeah, that's just proof of that. They can say whatever they want. The fact that they blew their lids over ice cream shows you that it is a big deal. It's very powerful. It's not going to bring down Israel's economy overnight, obviously, but it's a change in the mentality. We're seeing, for example, universities in the U.S. who are now saying that, yes, Israel is an apartheid state. We're seeing churches divesting from Israel and settlement. So, yes, it's a slow process, but it's working.
Increasingly, crimes of Israel are being exposed, whether it be citizen journalism or shows like ourselves and the work of people like yourself, Joharah. It's easy to see that it's a little racist apartheid state, and nobody wants to be its friend.
But this is what I don't understand. Yes, no one wants to be its friend, but then why? So, I don't know. I guess it's just the powers that be. They have the U.S. behind them, and Europe basically, and Australia, and all the West, more or less. But yes, on the ground, most people know. So I that's where BDS comes in play. I think that if change does happen, come on with the people, and the people can apply enough pressure on their governments. But again, it takes a long time. And where it comes to, for example, the U.S. or the EU, but more or less, mostly the U.S., I think that the solution is so simple. You close that faucet, on the aid, and things will change. But that's just me living in La La Land, apparently.
No, it's going to happen, Joharah. Have faith.
It will happen, inshallah. I hope so.
It will indeed. And one day, inshallah, we'll be able to share a cup of coffee in Jerusalem. And remember, and on the little bits we played in its liberation.
Exactly. I hope so. You always have to have hope, and you have to persevere. There's no other way.
Joharah, thanks so much for joining us today. It's been an honor to speak to you again. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. Have a good day.
That was Joharah Becker joining us from Palestine. Thanks for listening. Tell your friends, share the podcast, and remember, there's never been a better time for a free Palestine.